Hello everyone. We are studying about Indianization of civil services. In our last class we have seen through the Charter Act of 1833 and 1853 what kind of changes were brought, and during the time of Lord Lytton how age limit was reduced, the upper age limit of the appearing Indian civil services was reduced, and how by opposing this how again it was maintained 22 years. We have studied all this in our last class. So today we are going to study about some more commissions, some more acts by which there was huge changes in the civil services, because there was more Indianization during this time now. Okay, so more Indianization means what? Slightly, gradually, people of India, they were getting chance in civil services. It was not that everyone was fairly getting a chance. This is something we will study later on, but here we will study that how commissions were formed, how committees were formed to look into the matter. Okay, in which year these committees were formed and how they looked into the matter, and what recommendations they gave to include Indians in the civil services. So it is in page number 20 of the first chapter. The next paragraph, the Indian National Congress since its inception. Okay, what it has been doing, that I have already explained this part. I have already told that Indian National Congress, they were always fighting for this thing, Indianizing civil service examinations. They were always fighting, and they wanted that although the examinations were held in England, they wanted that it should also be held in India. Okay, we will see later on that those positions, those were required for the high class Britishers. Okay, those people, that means those were of the company, they got easily chance. Okay, but later on, due to these examinations, as these examinations were held in England, all not all people were getting chance, and later these things should be solved. Later and later, what happened, the people of India, they demanded that examinations should be held in both India and England. So in 1886, what happened, we already know Indian National Congress was formed in 1885. Okay, the next year, 1886, Lord Dufferin, he formed the Attrition Commission. Okay, how it was formed, why it was formed, we will see this. It was formed in 1886. Okay, to examine the whole issue. Okay, and it was created, okay, under the leadership of the then governor, lieutenant governor of Punjab, whose name was Charles Atchison. Okay, so why this was formed? So that Indians can get employment in public service. Okay, and to look into the matter deeply, this commission was formed by Lord Dufferin under Atchison. That is why it was called Atchison Commission. And who was Atchison? He was the then Lieutenant Governor of Punjab. So uh, public service commission, it was a public service commission. Okay, Atchison Commission was a public service commission. It was formed to look after this matter deeply. And what recommendation Atchison Commission gave, it is very important. Okay, among those important points, the main thing is that a three-tier classification was made by this commission. Okay, what was the three-tier classification of public services? One is imperial, one is provincial, and another is subordinate civil services. Why this is important, we will see as we are studying about the problems related to civil services in India. So regarding solving those problems, they were uh, classifying the entire public service or civil services under this three-tier system. So one will be the imperial civil services, next will be the provincial civil services, third will be the subordinate civil services. So in this recommendation, what happened, imperial civil services was to be reserved for the Englishmen, provincial civil services for Indians, subordinate civil services for Indians. Okay, this was the recommendation of the what attrition commission. So we will see that the examination, okay, the examination to enter into civil services, as it was demanded that it should be held simultaneously both in India and London. So it was taken, this decision was taken during this time. As I have told, the three-tier classification. In this classification, for the imperial civil services that was reserved for Englishmen, their examination was to be held in London. Okay, and simultaneously the provincial civil services and subordinate civil services examinations, these were the classifications, and this under the basis of these two classifications, Indians were to be appointed under these two categories. Okay, and their exam was to be held in India. So, and yes, many other recommendations were made. Okay, but still every recommendation made by attrition commission was not adopted or executed by the British government. So these were the changes done after the attrition commission was formed. So again we will see Islington commission was formed, okay, in 1912. Okay, Royal Commission public service was formed to look after the matter deeply. But what happened, this commission could not take any effective step although it was formed. So the important things we are discussing in details here. So just in case, Royal Commission on Public Service, it was formed under whose chairmanship? It was formed under Lord Islington. Just to know this, we are saying, but the main chronology we have to understand, the main names are this attrition commission. Okay, the acts we have studied just before, and later on we will study the Government of India Act 1919, 1935. In these acts, what changes were done. Next comes the Montego James Ford report 1919. This report, Montego James Ford report, added some uh, clauses, or what you say, recommendations in the Government of India Act 1919, okay, to bring about changes in the civil services. So this Montego Chelmsford report, what happened, it accepted the demand for Indianization of higher civil services, okay, whose demand of the Indians, it accepted, and it looked into the matter, and accordingly Montego Chelmsford prepared a provision, okay, accordingly prepared a provision for this. Okay, and these provisions were made in the Government of India Act 1919. That means by this acts, the provisions will be implemented in the civil services by this act of 1919, okay, on the basis of what, Montego Chelmsford report. So what were the changes done here? First of all, we may need to know what was the demand. The demand was what? The higher civil services should be Indianized. Higher civil services means what? In this three-tier system, what we have seen, one in the highest or the topmost one is imperial services, imperial civil services. That one is the higher one, and the demand was that Indians should be appointed in that higher one also. So what happened? Montego Chelmsford accepted this demand, and later on this imperial service, that means the first one, imperial services, was divided by Montego Chelmsford, or and after this Government of India Act 1919, it was divided into all India and central services. Okay, That means here also gradually Indians will be appointed, and promise that 1.5% of the total Indians to be appointed, and it will be increasing every year. So Montego Chelmsford, what is related with Montego Chelmsford in regard with the civil services? That means higher civil services should include Indians. So the provision was made, and it was made that 1.5% of the total Indians should be in this higher civil services, and every year this percentage will increase. Okay, and by the year maybe 1941, you can see, okay, that almost in the civil services Indians outnumbered the British. Okay, you don't need in details all this, but here what we see in the Indianization process is going on very gradually. Okay, year by year some acts are coming, and through these acts some changes are going on in the Indian civil services during the British period. So after this examinations were held in India. Okay, examinations were held in India. So now what Indians can get into civil services by appearing in India itself. They don't have to go to London for appearing this civil services. So after the Government of India Act 1919, uh, another commission was formed, that is Lee Commission. Okay, it was formed in 1923. Okay, and why it was formed? It was formed to implement the recommendations of the Montego Chelmsford Reform and Government of India Act 1919. Listen very carefully. Montego Chelmsford Report and Government of India Act 1919 have some recommendations. Okay, those recommendations were to be implemented by which commission? Lee Commission. And when was the Lee Commission formed? 1923. So it was recommending what? Lee Commission recommended that a public service commission was to be set up immediately in India. Public Service Commission. Okay, and raise the number of Indians in this civil service post by 50% within 15 years. From 1923, within the coming 15 years, the Lee Commission wanted that the number of Indians should rise in the Lee Commission by 50%. Understood? This was the Lee Commission's duty. Lee Commission's duty was to implement the recommendations made by Montego Chelmsford and Government of India Act 1919. So after this, after 1923, after that we will see 1935. Can you see, can you relate how far we have come from that 1833 act? Okay, 1833 act to this 1935. We have come a long uh, years in the recent long years. That means during this time what was going on, we can imagine 1935. We can imagine that during this time already non-cooperation and civil disobedience movement took place during this period. Okay, 19 1920 to 1935, 1930, then again in 1942. This was the period what of national movement going on in India. So during this time what's happening? So in about this civil services, what we are getting to learn about the starting of civil services under British rule up to the end of the British rule, how it was changed, and in the post British rule, how will be the character. We are getting to know about everything of the period. So what the Government of India Act 1935 declared? During that time it declared federal state in India. Yes, federal state in India means there will be a central government and there will be state governments, provincial level governments, and this as a whole is a federal government. Okay, and another thing is that in the provinces, the it was decided to form elected governments. Elected means, uh, to appoint officials through elections. Okay, to appoint officers through members of the government through election, elected governments. Okay, forming elected government in provinces too. And and in each province, public service commission was to be established. This was the points made in 1935 Act. Federal state establishment of elected government in provinces. Then another one is what? Public service commission in each province. It is not that in only center it will be there. Public service commission will be there in each province. Like today we have public service commission like UPSC, APSC in Assam. That means what? UPSC is in the Union Public Service Commission, the present one, as it is today. And another is the State Public Service Commission of every state. In Assam it is called APSC. Okay, so these are the changes which were done during the what? During the period of British rule up to the independence. Okay, after independence, what were the system? This kind, the entire examination process that was there during the British period, that was entirely changed. Okay, the old system of recruitment to the civil services was abolished. So what kind of examination will be there? All India level competitive examination. See, the competitive examination criteria has been changed, the rules had been changed. Now it will be all India level competitive examination. And another thing is that Union Public Service Commission was formed. Okay, in the central level, and in the state level, state public service commissions have been formed. Okay, so this chapter is almost finished here. So what we have studied in this chapter, first of all, the coming of the Europeans. Okay, then we will see taking of administration by this British after their trading in to expand their trading interests. They took over the administration. Okay, through various acts of governing acts, they have consolidated their rule through various policies. Then after that, when Indians were getting more educated through Western education, so after that, what we can see, Indians were getting chance in administration. Okay, through various acts they were getting chance in administration. Local self governments were formed in the by the Act of 1861. What changes we have seen? We have changed the modern administration system, a kind of modern administration system we have seen. Okay, later on what we have seen, Indianization of civil services we have seen. So the chapter is basically about how Indians were ruled by a foreign ruler, that means the British, and how they were coping up with the new administration, new ruling people, how Indians are coping up, and how they were fighting against this, how they were fighting against the injustice, and how much they were trying to coping up this with this. Like they were trying to learn English, they were like trying to learn modern educate trying to cope up with modern education, Western education, to know about this new system of administration. And so after as a result, they knew how to demand their own rights. Okay, only because they knew how to demand from the British, that is why they got right in the administrative matters, or they got chance in the administrative matters, which we have seen in the chapter. Otherwise, if the Indians, if they won't have any kind of, that means if they wouldn't have tried to get education, or if they wouldn't have tried to know what is going on, or how the British were exploiting, they would have never, that means we would have never got independence by the time we have got. Because by the time people were trying to know this, people were knowing that they should demand for their own rule. That is why we got independence by the time we have got in 1947.